Friar William, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure, happy to. Okay, well, um, I went to a liberal arts high school called Veritas Preparatory Academy in Phoenix, Arizona, which has a strong focus on the liberal arts and philosophy, literature. So I gained some experience there in having this type of discussion. After high school, I went directly to St. Thomas Aquinas Seminary, which was located in Winona, Minnesota at the time, although now it's in Dillwyn, Virginia. I completed a curriculum of 7 years of priestly training. One of those years was spent in Guadalajara, Mexico. And then after that, after my ordination as a priest, I was assigned to New Hamburg in Ontario, Canada. And then recently I was reassigned to Lévis in Quebec, where I'm currently trying to learn the French language. So I'm a priest of the Society of St. Pius X, which is a traditional Catholic priestly order. But that's probably a little bit more technical than what we want to get into at the moment. So,
cool. I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe that naturalism best explains everything. All the arguments and evidence are best explained by naturalism. Could you tell me some of the reasons and evidence you believe there are for belief in a God?
Sure. Well, maybe I should clarify first, in response to your position, that I think that natural causes are capable of explaining some aspects of the observable world, but not all. And then secondly, that even those which can be explained in some way by natural causes still do not receive their full or complete explanation from those causes, because natural causes only are able to act, to operate as secondary causes independent on a first cause. So there's kind of a distinction in my thesis, and so in providing evidence for the existence of a God, there are some effects in the observable world that I would say can only be caused directly by a divine being with intelligence, and those things would include what we call miracles in theology, as well as let's say the initial production of things into existence out of nothing, the initial conditions of the universe with certain aspects of design that's commonly referred to as fine tuning, and then also the production of certain beings of a higher order, living creatures, creatures with the power of sensation, the power of intelligence. These are all specific effects that I would say have to be the direct result of the action of a divine being. There are lots of others. In fact, I'd say everything else can be explained through natural causes, but those causes don't operate purely by their own power, but rather they operate instrumentally as secondary causes independent on a first cause.
Why do you think that there would need to be anything beyond natural causes to explain all these things? For example, you could say that these could be caused by unknown natural causes that we just haven't discovered yet. And that seems like it would have equally as much support, or probably better support, than any extra ontologies that we don't have evidence for.
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously, when we make arguments for the existence of God, God is a commonly accepted name that we use to refer to a certain being which has explanatory power, let's say, which is able to provide a causal explanation for why things exist. But what sort of being is it that would have to do that kind of thing? That's why you have different proofs for the existence of God, which look at different angles and say, well, the kind of being that would account for the universe as we see it has to have these specific qualities. And if it lacks these qualities, then it wouldn't be able to provide an adequate causal explanation. And ultimately, the most profound of these qualities, which is required in a kind of ultimate explanatory cause, is simplicity. Because basically, I mean, you're probably familiar with the arguments for God's existence from the aspect of efficient causality. And we say, for example, every being which is contingent, which is not a necessary being, requires something outside of itself, which is its cause. But how do you identify a being as contingent? There's a lot of different ways. For example, if something is in motion, we see contingency where there's movement. Movement always requires some cause which produces the movement.
I
But
would
if you want to
that
go, oh, go ahead.
that one I would object to. Like in physics,
Sure.
that's false. In physics,
Well,
there's causeless motion all the time.
Okay. I think maybe it helps, first of all, to make a distinction between inertial motion, which is a little bit trickier to deal with on the metaphysical level, and then other kinds of motion which involve acceleration. I think it's probably fair enough to say that when a body, let's say, changes its state of motion or of rest, when there's some change, then that change requires a cause. I would be surprised to learn
No,
if there are
in physics,
changes.
that's false. In physics, there is true randomness, causeless motion all the time, in every variety: inertial motion, momentum, spin, charge, all of it.
Yeah, well, okay. I'll be frank with you. I'm not a physicist, so I can't directly refute that claim on the level of physics. I don't have the tools.
Well, just to clarify,
However, yeah,
it's literally the consensus of everybody in the field. There's a poll called "A Snapshot of the
yeah,
Fundamental Attitudes of Quantum Mechanics," something along those lines, by
yeah,
Schlosselhauser. I don't know how to
sure.
spell that. And the first question is on randomness. Is randomness a fundamental force in physics? And it's like, I think single digits said no. So
Hmm.
it's not
Sure.
really something that it can't be refuted. It is the
Um,
only supported position in physics.
well, okay. There's a lot of. I think physics needs a lot of house cleaning because there's a lot of concepts in physics which aren't properly defined. That's, I think, one of the major problems is physicists throw around a lot of terms without having defined them. Um, And if you take the traditional definition of the term, what they assert about it is an absurdity or a contradiction. I mean,
Well,
even if you just take the idea of, let's say, space expanding and space, being warped or turned. I mean, traditionally, space is understood as a frame of reference. They occupy space, which is a way of measuring their extension in relation to one another, and so on. Space is essentially a measure of quantity, of size, etc. So
well,
when you
that so
say,
I agree with
yeah,
half of what you said there, but half I
sure,
disagree with. So space is
sure.
extremely well defined.
Okay,
Space
go ahead.
is an actual physical thing. It's not a frame of reference. It's a literal physical thing in physics,
Well,
and it's represented by the
yeah, yeah,
lambda symbol,
yep, yep,
and it can be measured and it can be bent and it can be shaped, and it's not even the
sure,
most fundamental thing. It's an emergent from quantum fields, and so it's
yeah.
very well defined what space is in physics, and it's
Well,
been. But I
I don't
wanted
think
to, the
that. Yeah,
first
yeah,
part,
go ahead.
I agreed with what you said. So where you said
Sure,
that there are
sure.
many not well defined terms,
Yeah.
and I agree with that.
Hmm.
But I would
Yep.
say that all of the terms in physics are better defined than the terms in that you have been using: necessary, contingent,
Sure.
simplicity. Simplicity, especially, I think, is a completely arbitrary term
Okay.
that can be applied to any number of different
Well, I mean, I
properties.
think I can produce clear definitions for at least most of the terms that I'll be using. And I would say that simplicity is a term that we have to define negatively. It means the absence of a composition or a multiplicity of parts. I think that's a clear definition. I would say that a lot of things, even space as you just defined it, I don't think that there was really a definition there. I think there's the assertion that space belongs to a certain genus of, let's say, material beings that can be moved and manipulated. But then I'd say, well, you've changed what we're talking about, and that's not space as it's traditionally understood. So we'll find there's this new being, which we'll call space. We'll use the same word, but it's not what we were talking about before. Um, so, anyways, but I know that that's getting perhaps sidetracked on an issue which is not of central
Well, I
importance.
think I think there is an important issue there, which is
Yeah,
how we define things. Like in
sure. Yeah,
physics, we define things based off of what can be demonstrated to be real, not just arbitrary things we make up in our head. Like we can make up any kind of definition we want. A triangle is a magical pink potato or something.
yeah,
But in
sure.
physics, definitions are limited to that which can be demonstrated or discovered, not
Mhm.
asserted, because there's a distinction between discovered properties and asserted properties.
Sure.
And so in physics, space is literally made of nothing but mathematics that has been demonstrated. It's all of the math there has been demonstrated.
But so
Um,
sorry, are you saying that space is made of mathematics?
no, the math represents things, and then space is made of
Right.
things, quantum fields
S-
specifically.
Sure. Okay. I mean, there's always a regression here, because then that begs the question of what is a field? Is a field a thing, or is it just once again a kind
Well,
of
I don't
reference
think that
point or measure for
matters.
things?
So, like, because
Yeah.
once we have the ability to
Mhm.
demonstrate something exists, whether or
Okay.
not we know what that thing is made of just doesn't make a difference. Like, we know black holes exist. Do we know what they're made of? Nope.
Mhm.
No idea, but they exist. So it doesn't make a difference
Sure.
what they're made of, because when
Mhm.
asserting a black hole or asserting the properties of a black hole, they can be shown to not be a figment of our imagination. Even if I give a
Mm.
perfect definition of a leprechaun or something,
Yeah.
since it hasn't been demonstrated to
Yeah.
exist, my ability to give a definition is just irrelevant.
Yeah. So I mean, I do agree that there's to assert that something exists, you need more than just a clear definition of it, for sure. And I'm not taking, let's say, for the existence of God, I'm not going to rely upon a kind of ontological argument. From I'm not going to try and take an idea of God and say, as some thinkers did, God's the greatest being that one can imagine, but it's greater to exist than not to exist. Therefore, God exists. That I agree that violates the rules of logic, and that's not my approach.
I did want to add
Um,
one more thing
yeah,
too. I agree that you need more than a definition, but also it's the
yeah,
case that even if you don't have a definition of
mm,
like black holes or whatever, the fact that it can be demonstrated to exist is sufficient. And so it isn't whether or not you have a complete definition is
well,
just irrelevant to the existence of a thing.
so okay, if you can demonstrate that a certain thing exists, that's well and good. But in order to start arguing from that to other things, you need to have a working definition of the thing, which is clear and doesn't involve any internal contradictions. Because every time that you take something and try to argue for something else from it, there is implied a certain notion, a concept of the thing, which needs to be expressed by a definition.
I'm not
So
sure I would agree with that because again,
yeah, yeah,
black holes are defined by the effects we see. Do we know what they're made of?
sure,
Nope. But we don't need to know
yeah.
what they're made of. So we all we need to do
Mm-mm.
is say that
Yeah,
here are the effects we can see, and from these effects we
sure,
can infer other things, even if we don't have a complete definition. So we
sure.
don't need a definition as long as we have a way to show that the thing is real and has real effects in the world, and then we can infer things about the effects. Well, those effects
Mm.
are similar to these other effects we see
Yeah,
over
yeah,
here, so maybe they're causing that thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I would not argue that we need let's say, a complete or exhaustive definition that reveals the intrinsic nature of the thing. So I am in agreement there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So what
So
about doing, because you were mentioning that we
yes,
need a
so
being of some kind.
yeah. Well, it was going back to how do we identify something as contingent? Um, and I was okay. I was giving the example of movement. That movement is always a sign of contingency, and you were saying, well, no, things just move randomly, which I do not agree with. But perhaps it's for the sake of the conversation, we can leave that aside for now if you want. Because I was going to advance. It was just an example. I was going to advance and say that probably the most fundamental thing that we can use to identify a thing as contingent is if it has some kind of composition of diverse elements,
Well,
because
the,
there's
the
always
reason I
the yep.
the reason I
Mhm.
objected to the motion thing is
Sure.
because it seems like what you're defining as contingent seems arbitrary. Essentially, just
Mm.
picking things you don't like or something, things that don't correspond to your
I have no
preferred
problem
idea.
with
Well,
movement.
no, no,
I'm very
that's not.
glad to live and move myself, but go on.
So the point
Yeah,
here is
yeah,
that I
yeah.
don't think you have a meaningful way to differentiate contingent from necessary. It seems like you're
Yeah.
arbitrarily picking properties that may, in fact, be necessary properties and may not be a
Mm-mm.
contingent, and you're just calling them
Yeah.
contingent.
Well, I think it is clear. One thing about necessity is that it tends not to change. So, for example, if a thing is stationary at one moment and then it's in motion later, I think that's a clear sign that that motion is not a necessary property of the thing. Because if it's capable to of not being in movement and then afterwards it's in movement, well, I think that everything which is necessary, insofar as it's necessary, it's stable. It doesn't change.
Well, couldn't the
Um,
opposite be true? It's like necessary that it's already in motion and then it stops, and then the ceasing of motion would be the contingent thing. And so to say that
yeah,
either
that
being stationary or being in motion, whichever was the fundamental state of reality, whichever those were, I would
mm,
agree would be the necessary thing. I think that by necessary you mean whatever the fundamental state of reality is. But to
yeah, and
say
I
that it
yeah,
must
yeah.
have these properties and not these properties seems
Mhm.
arbitrary. It seems like we're picking ones over the other.
Sure. Okay. Well, I do think though that we can go back to that point of change, and I'd say that in fact, if a thing is at one point in motion and at another point not in motion, or vice versa, that neither of the two states, neither motion nor rest, is essential to it. Neither is necessary, because if it were necessary, if it flowed from the very nature of the thing, then it would always have that quality. If rest were essential to a thing, if rest were necessary, the thing would always be at rest, and likewise with motion. So I think, in fact, that's a clear example where I'm not arbitrarily saying that something is contingent. Whatever changes is clearly contingent insofar as it changes, because it doesn't have to be the way that it is if it's changing.
Well, sort of, I agree. So I would say it's not fundamental to its nature. I would agree there, but I'd say that
Sure.
neither motion nor change are fundamental. So I'd say that neither of those things qualify. So
Sure.
when I think of
yeah.
like a necessary being, I think the only thing that's really required is like the properties of a quantum field, and that's it. That's all you need. That's what you get. You got a necessary being, quantum fields, and that is the best
Yeah.
definition we have yet, because those
Okay.
the properties
So
of a quantum field have been demonstrated to be most likely to be the fundamental aspects of reality.
Okay, so that's very interesting because I mean, I appreciate that you're willing to go out there and just say what you think is the most fundamental aspect of reality. Because I think there's a lot of people who take an atheistic or agnostic position, but then it's easy for them to defend because they can just move around and say, well, I don't know, I haven't identified what's the fundamental cause of reality, but I just am not convinced by your arguments for this particular thing. And I think it's a very easy position to defend because you don't have any position of your own except insofar as you negate someone else's. So I am interested by that. Would you mind unpacking that idea just a little bit more? That it's quantum fields that are at the source of reality.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a distinction between discovered properties and asserted properties.
Mm-hmm.
Quantum fields have been discovered, and they seem to be the core essence of everything. There's no non-quantum field thing as far as we can tell.
Okay.
And they seem to be unchanging outside of space and time, eternal,
Mm-hmm.
or not necessarily unchanging. They can change, and that's fine. But whatever the fundamental essence of what makes a quantum field
Yeah.
is unchanging. But they can
Okay.
fluctuate. There's quantum fluctuations all the time.
Yeah. So yeah.
Go ahead.
So this, I want to jump back on the notion of change though, because if you identify within a quantum field an element which is unchanging and you say, well, that's fundamental, that's necessary. And then there's also something else which does change. There are fluctuations in the field. How do you explain the fluctuations? Because once again, I'd say I'm not
Change is a part
arbitrarily
of its nature.
Okay, that's very well to say. But when you say change, so what you have there is you have an idea, an abstract concept, and the concept change is unchanging. But change itself changes, and that's the problem.
I don't understand.
Yeah. So in
like,
other words, our means of conceiving change. It's a question here of psychology and the way that the mind works. When we conceive of change, what we do is we form a concept of a certain nature or reality. And my concept of change is unchanging. So would you agree with that? Let's say I think of the idea of change, and my concept is itself stable. It doesn't change.
I don't think so. Like, my concept of change has changed a lot of what it means for things to change as we understand.
So yes,
but
it's
like when I'm talking about change, I'm thinking there's a fundamental property of quantum fields, which is their existence, and then they have a contingent property, if you want to call it, of fluctuations, and those are both a part of what quantum fields are. They entail both of those things.
Yeah, but so I think it's, however, I think it is contradictory. There's a self-contradiction in asserting that, let's say, it is a property of a thing to change without any outside cause of that change. I think there is a contradiction there because I think that every change in a thing is a note, an infallible sign of contingency, which is to say that the thing is not its own explanation.
I don't see the contradiction there. So there's like a contradiction is like P and not P, essentially.
Yes.
Contradiction. But to say something changes randomly, that's not a contradiction. There's no P and not P there.
Well, I think there is a contradiction. It needs to be unpacked. It's not evident in the way that we express the thing with words. Just like if I say, for example, square circle, there is a contradiction there. But at the same time, it has to be explained. It has to be unpacked. I say, well, a square is, a figure with 4 sides, and a circle is a figure that does not have 4 sides. So you're saying, yes, there are 4 sides, and no, there are not. So I'd say that in a statement like, a thing, what was the statement again? Something like a thing changes randomly without any cause.
Yeah, changes happen.
Yeah, random change. I do think that the idea of random is in fact a contradictory notion, like square circle, because essentially what you're saying is that the thing changes, and there is no reason for it changing.
Yes.
And that is the reason why it changes, because there is no reason.
No. Because like a reason is like a determining factor in what causes it to change.
Right. And
Having
you'd
none
say-
of those things
yeah.
would not be itself a reason. So like if I say,
So
if I have a reason to do X,
yeah.
and then if I contrast that to having no reason to do X, having no reason to do X is not itself a reason. That wouldn't. It's not.
So I agree, but then I think that if there's no reason, then X doesn't happen. And I think that when you say a thing changes randomly, what you are saying, grammatically and logically, is that a thing changes by virtue of randomness. It's thanks to randomness that the thing changes, and that's where I think there is an internal contradiction. Is you're saying the thing changes without a cause, but the cause is randomness. It changes thanks to randomness.
Well, no, because in this context, randomness is there is no reason. There is nothing causing the change.
Yeah. So, right, but I think at the very least we have to be careful with our way of formulating the assertion, because if I say a thing changes randomly, at face value, randomly would seem to be a kind of explanation for why the thing changes. But in fact, what you're saying is the thing changes and there is no explanation.
Right. There's a causeless change.
Yeah. So,
well, the question is where is the logical contradiction in that? Because there doesn't seem to be a logical contradiction there.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to. So let's say there clearly is a logical contradiction if you're asserting that randomness is the cause of the change.
Right.
I think that to say that. Yep. So I think that it is rather the denial of a self-evident truth to say that a thing changes with no cause.
Well, that's not a contradiction. So denying a self-evident truth, which I don't think matters, but that isn't a contradiction.
Sure. So I think it's a contradiction insofar as if it's a self-evident truth, you see the evidence, and yet at the same time you say that you don't see it. But I can't go into your brain and prove to you that you see that if a thing changes, it needs a cause.
Well, that's not a self-contradiction, because self-contradiction is a logical statement, P and not P.
Sure.
Denying self-evident truths is actually pretty low on the scale. You can do that all the time. We literally do it for science. Because science proves self-evident truths to be wrong every day.
But that's I'd say that's another contradiction, although it's not easy to parse that grammatically. But if you say that science proves self-evident truths to be not true, are they self-evident or not?
Well, self-evident just means it appears true to you. That's all it means. It doesn't mean it is true. So like one of the things was that solid objects can't pass through other solid objects. That's something that's self-evident to people. But through quantum mechanics and quantum tunneling, discovered, they do. They literally do.
Well, no, that's why. See, I think that a lot of this stuff, obviously, there is an element of truth in these scientific proclamations, but I think that the way in which the truth is expressed is problematic. It involves internal contradictions, and there, for example, I'd make a distinction. Well. Insofar as a body is solid, it can't pass through another body insofar as that other body is solid. But we can say that a certain body is solid in some respect, but not solid in another. On the macroscopic scale, it would appear to be solid, but it's actually made up of a bunch of atoms which are far removed from each other in space. So it's solid in one respect, but not in another. But I mean, I don't think that we can accept statements which are which are internally contradictory. Um,
Well, none of
it's
my
an it's
statements
an
were internally contradictory. Like, they're literally a solid object can pass through another solid object, and I don't just mean like the electrons miss, like
yeah,
slightly,
yeah,
they just wiggle through. I
yeah,
mean, literally, they just
mm,
go to the other side because of
yeah.
how wave function collapse works.
Yeah, but then I ask you, what do you mean by solid? At the end of the day, if it seems to be evident that in the nature of solidity, um, the thing occupies a certain place to the exclusion of any other. Um, I don't know what you mean by solid anymore. Once you say that another thing can pass through it.
Well, by solid here, they just mean a bond through a force, usually the strong force between
Mhm.
the particles,
Yeah,
the protons and neutrons of some kind, and that
sure.
bond has not dissipated or
Okay.
been separated by anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then I think that's a different idea of solid from what is normally attached to the term. A bond is, as it seems to be understood in physics, is not a thing which fills up space and is impenetrable. A bond is a certain relationship between two things.
Well, bond is actually a thing. Like, a bond is literally particles being connected through a force.
Right, but
And if
is a
it's
force a
separated,
thing?
then forces are things.
So, well, when I say thing, I mean substance, something that exists in itself. Does a force exist in itself, or is it rather a
Maybe.
property or an activity or something else?
Well, I
Um,
think that material, physical stuff is a substance in the way that you use it. I don't know if forces are the fundamental substance or if they're composed of some other thing, but they
yeah,
could be, and that'd be fine.
yeah. I mean, so I have I have a problem with saying that that force is a substance. I have a problem with saying that energy is a substance,
Why?
but because um, the traditionally energy would be defined as the movement of a thing or the thing's ability to move, but it's always in function of a thing's activity. I don't see how an activity can be a substance or the power to act. That seems clearly to be what we would call in philosophy
I'm
an
not.
accident, a
I'm not.
modification of a substance.
I'm not following your, because energy
Sure.
is literally the stuff that makes stuff. It's matter is energy. So I
Mm.
don't understand your usage
Well,
of energy there. 'Cause
yeah.
I think you're
So
conflating a lot of colloquial terminology from actually science
yeah.
terminology, because science is the stuff that we know exists. The colloquial stuff is just our made up definitions.
Well, so I think, in fact, so there's a more fundamental problem here, which is that I think that common sense and what you call colloquial terms, that's actually fundamentally trustworthy, and that science may refine the concepts that we have, which belong to common sense, but I don't think that you have common sense on the one hand, which is our natural intuitive grasp of reality, and then science, and I don't see how those things can be fundamentally opposed to each other. I think that science, its role is to, let's say, it reflects upon things that we know in a vague and confused way by common sense, and clarifies and proves, and then extends our field of knowledge. But I think that there is a fundamental problem with science when it constantly generates propositions and notions which are opposed to common sense.
I see it differently. I see common sense as like our first
Mm,
intuitive understanding of reality.
yeah.
And then we need some better method to
Mm,
differentiate of these
yeah.
things, which ones are the
Yeah.
true ones and which ones are the false ones. And so for
Mm,
me, science is the way that we filter out all of the bad intuitions, all the bad common sense things that are just wrong. And we need
yeah.
some way to do that because most of them are.
Yeah, well, I would challenge that most of our common sense intuitions are wrong. It's true that, let's say, I'm not saying that everything is as it appears to be. For example, I'm not saying that it seems intuitive that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, so therefore the Earth must be at rest and the sun must be moving. And I'm not saying that, but I do think that. Common sense is, let's say, if common sense is rotten at core, then that would logically lead to a universal skepticism. I don't know why I would trust, measurements and very refined processes that are done in the lab if I can't trust my most basic intuitions of reality.
I think that's like what, slippery slope something. So like, even if we know that some common sense is things are false, some common sense things we can trust. So the fact that we can prove that many of them are not trustworthy doesn't mean that we would then doubt all of them. So I think that science as a method, because we know of tens of thousands of fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions, problems with the brain. We know that our faculties are not inherently trustworthy. The ones that are trustworthy are the ones that we can use to infer things about the future, whichever ones those are.
Okay.
And so, go ahead.
So, but not your faculties by which you know the present reality, just insofar as you can predict the future. That confuses me.
Well, so it's like the way my epistemology starts is I think therefore I am. So I have some experience, and that doesn't tell me whether or not the experience is true. Everything could be false, brain in a vat, whatever. And then so I need some way. I have different kinds of experiences. Like I can imagine a unicorn. I don't see a unicorn.
Sure.
So there's some difference between my imaginary stuff and the stuff I'm experiencing. And I need some kind of a method to differentiate which of the things I'm experiencing are of the imaginary kind versus of the experiential kind.
Okay.
And the ones that can do that effectively are the ones that can predict the future. So if I'm seeing a hallucination of a leprechaun or a unicorn or something, and it stabs me, I don't normally die. I don't normally feel pain or whatever. And so it's not very good at predicting the future. Whereas if I see a rock coming at me, I can pretty accurately predict it's going to hit me in the face and it's going to hurt. And so we can use that method to try and build a more comprehensive methodology of science to establish a difference between the imaginary things and the real things. We can figure out which one of these common sense intuitions we have are reliable, which ones aren't, which is what we've been doing. And so we shouldn't definitely not prima facie trust our common sense intuitions. We should try to filter out, we should take them and then test them and then find out if they're trustworthy.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, I agree that, okay. So I think there is some reasonableness to what you're saying about the, let's say predictive power of a certain notion, is a strong sign of its truthfulness. And I do agree that common sense intuitions are subject to being refined and purified through science. But I think that often science seems to disprove a truth of common sense, but it does so by changing the definition of the term with which you're working. As for example, I would say space contracting and twisting and turning and all that. I think that you're able to make that kind of assertion in the name of science because you've changed the definition of the term that you're working with. And it's no longer a framework of reference. It's some kind of physical substance.
Well, I kind of agree there. But I think that the reason we changed the definition is because the definition we had before doesn't correspond to reality. So if we called space a philosophical concept, it's not a physical thing, and then science proves nope, it's actually a physical thing, then the philosophical concept was wrong. Our intuitive usage of the word space was wrong, and this space, what actually it is this physical thing. It's a physical field that's made up of actual mattery, energy, physical stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's possible, for example, for science to demonstrate that there exists some kind of a physical medium, which is everywhere, and which is perhaps the medium through which radiation waves pass and whatever. And that medium, that physical medium, can be stretched and compressed. All that doesn't involve, to my mind, any contradiction. But to say that the frame of reference itself, in which things exist, is stretched and changed. Well, I think that begs the question. Let's say space is stretched in relation to what? In relation to what is space stretched? Is space curved? In relation to the things itself that space is measuring? I think that there's a it begs a question.
I don't quite understand that. There in physics we measure it versus a universal constant of some kind, but it's not space. Space is a particular thing that I agree measures the distance between two objects or whatever, which does literally change by your perspective. So the distance between two objects will actually change dependent upon the observer's position and speed relative to those objects, and it doesn't just perceptually change; it literally changes. And it's completely contingent on the aspects of the person observing the two spaces. And we know this because it's been tested and demonstrated irrefutably in tons of different ways. And so we know that space, as we think of it as the distance of two objects, is actually not a frame of reference. It's a literal physical thing that can be changed from all the experimentation. And so there is a frame of reference, but the frame of reference is like a mathematical constant. It's not actually space. Space isn't the frame of reference.
Well, but I think it's kind of arbitrary that we've, if you can see that there is a frame of reference, and that was normally called space, I think back, before these physical experiments were done. And now you transfer that term from the frame of reference to a new thing, which we've discovered, which undergoes all these changes.
Well, no. So I'm saying that that new thing we discovered is still space, but what we use as the frame of reference isn't that anymore. We use something else. We use Lorentz transformations, which has nothing to do with space. It's not space. We're just space is still the same thing that we meant it by, which is the distance between two objects, essentially. But that thing is no longer the frame of reference because it doesn't work as a frame of reference. We have to use something else that does. And it's not space. It's not a field of that kind.
Yeah, well, I think, okay, there's, I think to really fruitfully have this discussion, it would require, it's more than we can do now, because, every key word, every key term should be defined, and, what is a field and so on. And you certainly, I'll certainly acknowledge that you know more about contemporary physics than I do. So it's you would have to teach me a lot of what physics says. But I would want to subject that to the light of philosophical analysis and say, okay, what is the definition of each term, and what do we mean fundamentally by it?
That's fair. So to ask a clarifying question, let's say that you did go to the physics universities and talk to the professors about this, and they're like, yep, TJump is correct here, that we had this common notion of space as the frame of reference, and we no longer use that because we know space is completely subjective in a sense. It's not the frame of reference. Now we use this other thing that isn't a spatial. It's not even analogous to space. It's something completely different. Would that be evidence for you to the fact that science does contravene on our common sense intuitions and replaces them with something better occasionally?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think that, first of all, what science proposes, it has to be something which can be grasped by the human mind. And I'm not sure that what physicists are proposing when they say those things, I'm not sure that that's even something which is able to be grasped intellectually. So I think it would have to satisfy certain fundamental philosophical criteria. It would have to not involve any internal contradictions. So basically, I can't answer your question in advance. I think I would have to,
I agree. It doesn't have to have, if it has logical contradictions, clearly I would also consider that a problem, but the quantum mechanics doesn't entail logical contradictions, luckily. And there are things like non-Euclidean geometries, which don't exist in reality, but function very well to describe reality, imaginary numbers, those kinds of things. And these things, like imaginary numbers, are sort of imaginable, like four-dimensional objects are sort of imaginable by humans, but not really. But we still know that they're accurate descriptions of reality because they can be used to make testable predictions. So even if things can't be comprehended by the human mind, if they're still able to make testable predictions about the future, I still think that's reason to accept them. And the fact that it's able to be comprehended by us is not a great criterion.
Yeah, I would not require a perfect comprehension of the thing. I would certainly require that the notion of the thing doesn't involve any internal contradictions. That's all. But I'm curious how you answer this, because one of the ways in which physics seems to, and materialism in general seems to contradict notions of common sense would be in the idea of a substance being a certain thing which has an essential unity. And this is especially relevant, I think, in regard to people, living beings, and more specifically humans. Would you say, for example, that as a human being, you have an essential unity, that you are one being?
I don't know what that means. I mean, I think so.
Yeah. So it means, when I say I'm referring to a certain being, myself, which is essentially one.
Well, that's the part I'm
Now,
confused upon, is the
yes,
essentially one thing. I'm not,
yes, yes, yes,
that
yeah.
part I don't quite understand.
Sure. So I think, at least in a classical materialist frame of reference, what fundamentally exists are, perhaps particles. Maybe it's fields now. Maybe I'm a quantum field. I don't know. Um, and but when if we at least if we take the particle approach, if reality is fundamentally particles, which are the true substances, which associate with one another in certain accidental arrangements. Ultimately, the question of, what am I would be, well, I'm a bundle of particles that have a
Sure.
certain, accidental arrangement. And I would say that therefore, if that were true, I would have only an accidental unity. That is to say that essentially, or properly speaking, I would not be a single entity. I would be an assortment of various entities which are grouped together in a non-essential way.
Well, like, so I definitely think I'm a group of assorted entities, and my consciousness is one of those entities, which is also a group of assorted entities. I don't see
Okay.
a
Yeah.
problem with that.
Well, I mean, I do. And again, it's not that I can do a demonstration in modern physics to prove to you that that's wrong. I mean, it's not, I don't think it belongs to the domain of physics. I think it belongs to the domain of philosophy. Because I think it's an absurd idea to say that I am essentially an aggregate of things. I am consciousness, whatever that is, plus I don't know, a skeletal framework, and muscles, and arteries and neurons, and that I'm just all of that stuff packaged together. I mean, is that
Why would saying that I'm a bunch of smaller things packaged together as opposed to one big thing, why would that be a difference? What's the difference?
Well, because it would be more appropriate, I think, to begin with, to say we. We think this or that, because it's actually, yeah, I'm a plurality. I
I
think that would
don't,
be one of
because
the.
like my heart is a bunch of different things, but together it functions to produce one function. And so
Yep.
if my consciousness is made up of one essence of soul stuff, or 10 different essences of soul stuff that combine together to produce one consciousness, I wouldn't see a problem with that. Kind of like water is hydrogen and oxygen.
Yep.
It's not just water. And so I think consciousness would be able to accomplish the same task of being consciousness, even though it was a composite of other things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do agree that things which have only an accidental or non-essential unity can have a unified function, like a computer. I would agree that a computer is an aggregate of parts, which a computer doesn't have an essential unity. It has maybe a functional unity, and it has one output, thanks to the way in which the parts are organized. But I think that when a person asserts, I think, I want, I believe, I love, I hate, that there is, I think that there is implicit in that statement the assertion that am one thing. I am one being,
How is that different
fundamentally.
from saying my heart pumps blood? So that's like saying my heart is one thing, but it's a composite.
Sure,
Even though
sure.
the composite creates a
Yeah,
function, it can still
yeah,
be a single thing. And so I think consciousness would be the
yeah.
same in that, regardless of whether or not, I think my consciousness is one thing, but
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
wouldn't make a difference whether it was an individual soul entity, or whether it was multiple parts that came together to make a soul entity. I don't see why it would make a difference one way or the other.
Mhm. Well, so I think it maybe would beg the question: what is the principle of unity in you? So, and I'm in agreement that obviously, for example, I would consider all the parts of my body to be a part of myself. My hand is a part of me.
Oh, you just clarify.
That's
I'm just talking just about the consciousness. So we can
yeah.
suppose there is no physical body. Say we just are like a soul of some kind, and we're
Mhm,
contrasting two different kinds of potential soul types.
yeah.
Type A is just a singular essence of soul thing, and type B is like a composite of soul stuff, and
Mhm,
it's just comprises one conscious entity. And so to me, it wouldn't make a difference. I'd say both are logically possible. I wouldn't see a problem with either one, where there's some kind of
mhm,
different kinds of soul stuff, and when you combine that soul stuff in a certain way, it produces a conscious entity, as a, or a single kind of soul thingy that's an individual into and of itself. Both of those seem perfectly fine to me. I wouldn't see a problem either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that things which are composite can on one level can nevertheless be one on another level. But I do think there is a meaningful distinction between things that are only accidentally one, like a pile of rocks, or even a Lego set, which is all the parts are stuck together. I think there's a meaningful difference between that and something which is essentially one, which is one by its very nature. So that that element, which is the principle of unity, is even more important than the thing insofar as it's multiple and divided.
Well, essentially, one seems to be moving it back to like a much more fundamental question here. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
take any given person who I think we both agree
Yeah.
are contingent beings of some kind.
Yeah.
Would it make a difference if there was a contingent being who had a consciousness that was a product of a bunch of composite soul stuff versus one who was essence of soul stuff?
I think that so. Again, it's not going to be easy to demonstrate this. I think that the assertion of a consciousness, which is essentially a composite of things, is an internal contradiction, because I think that the notion of consciousness entails a unified and essentially unified being, which is conscious. To know is the operation of a being which is essentially one, not the operation of a composite. Which is one reason I would say why, for example, a computer can never know something. A computer may be able to, receive an input and generate an output, which helps us to know things. But I think that one of the reasons why a computer can never know or never be conscious is because its unity is merely accidental.
Well, I don't understand the argument there. So, like, I don't see a problem with thinking that consciousness can only come about when you combine green and red soul stuff. Yeah, green soul stuff will never be consciousness. Red soul stuff will never be consciousness. But if you combine green and red soul stuff, you get consciousness. I don't see a problem with something along those lines.
Well, I think the problem would be a distinction would be have to be made between the way in which the things are combined, because I think that things can be combined into a whole, which is essentially one. Things can also be combined into a whole which is only accidentally one. And I think that for there to be consciousness, the whole needs to have an essential unity rather than accidental unity.
I don't see the significance in the distinction between accidental and essential here. Like,
Yeah.
I think of it as is something a fundamental aspect of nature, kind of like panpsychists think consciousness is just a thing in nature, versus the physicalist who thinks that consciousness is an emergent property of other physical things. And so, like water, it's a combination of other things. And to me, I don't see both are clearly possible. I don't see why there would be a problem. I clearly think physicalism is more likely to be correct, especially given the complexity of what consciousness is doing, having ideas and stuff. It seems to make more sense that it's a composite of much more fundamental individual parts doing processing units to be able to give me speech and language and ideas.
And what about an idea itself? I mean, what do you see an idea as? What is it? What is an idea?
I see an idea as a combination of neurological firings.
Yeah. Okay. And love. What's love?
Same thing.
Okay. Yeah. That's so. I think that if physics demonstrates that an idea is a combination of neurological firings, or that love is that too, I think that we need to put the brakes on physics and say, well, wait a second. I don't care what you're finding in the lab. If this is the conclusion, there's a mistake somewhere along the way.
Why? Because I don't see it makes a difference what it's made of. Like, the significance of love doesn't seem to be contingent on the parts it's made of, whether it's essence of soul stuff or combinations of matter. To me, it doesn't make any difference. Kind of like a chair. It doesn't matter if a chair is made of wood or metal or paper. If it does the thing, who cares what parts it's made of?
Well, okay. What's the thing that an idea does? Maybe that might be more clear. That might bring clarity. So if an idea is essentially neurons firing, well, what does that do?
What does it do?
Yes.
It has a reflective impact on other neurons firing.
Okay. And what's the point of that?
Well, given our evidence of evolution, I'd say the best evidence is survival. I mean, I could posit a
Okay.
greater kind of purposey thing, like if there's some kind of law of physics of
Yeah.
morality and it's meant to maximize moral virtue or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I don't think, although it's
Well,
in a
how would you
way,
answer it? What do you
yeah.
think ideas do?
So I think an idea is the mind's grasping of a certain nature as a thing in reality.
And
It's
why would that be any less true if the mind was physical or soul stuff?
Okay. Well, I think the question was not what is the mind, but rather what is a concept. And so I think that if a concept is neurons firing, that has nothing to do with in and of itself. It has nothing to do with grasping a certain nature or thing in reality. Um,
Well, unless the mind is made of the neurons, in which case then it would. So like if
yeah,
whatever the mind is made of,
yeah,
the substance that makes it up
yeah.
would have a direct impact on the concepts that interact with the mind. And so if the mind is made of matter and the neurons are the matter and the neurons fire, then that would be directly what you said, the words you said, something about mind grasping ideas.
Grasping of reality, but
Yeah.
so I don't deny that obviously there's a physical organ, a brain, which involves neurons firing every time that we do some kind of mental operation. I don't deny that that's a facet of reality, that is an aspect, but to reduce the nature of a concept to that neural activity, to me that seems to be absurd on face value. Like
Well,
I
my question is
just
more general here. My question is more
yeah.
like, suppose the mind could be made of physical stuff. Suppose the mind
Yes.
could be made of soul stuff. In that case, it
Mhm.
doesn't seem like there's any difference whether you reduce the mind to physical stuff or to soul stuff. If it's just a bunch of parts or a single essence, makes no difference. The mind is the same either way. And so, if it is the case that the mind is physical, this physical
Mhm.
stuff would then cause the ideas, which would then be the relating of ideas to reality. And so there wouldn't be a problem there. And so it seems like you're begging the question, simply saying that, oh no, it can't possibly be the case that the mind is a bunch of physical stuff, without actually um, taking it as a philosophical possibility and saying, if it was the case, then what's the difference between the matter causing these ideas versus the soul stuff causing these ideas?
Um, okay, yeah, it's sorry, it's a bit complicated, because I don't think that I was making. I mean, I would want to make claims about what the mind is, but I think the my question was rather about the concept itself, um, and I would say that I don't see how you can say that a concept is neurons firing. I think you can say a concept maybe requires or involves neurons firing, but what is the effect of neurons firing? It's okay, so neurons fire and then that has an effect on another part of the brain, but where is the concept involved?
No,
um
it is the neurons firing. So
yeah,
identitarianism is that
yeah,
ideas and the physical things are
yeah,
synonymous.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm sorry, I don't know how to expose by some kind of argument how that is absurd in itself, but I honestly don't know how someone can believe that. I don't know, um, because to me, if I have a concept of whatever it may be, even let's say I have a concept of the color red, what does redness have to do with neural activity? Um,
Well,
yeah,
why does that? Because the question is more general here. Why?
yeah,
Let's suppose you have the concept of the color red.
yeah,
What difference does it make if that's a composite of other stuff we don't understand versus a singular entity? To me, it seems like
mm,
there's no problem either way. Our
yeah,
ability to understand how a composite versus an essence fundamentally causes that is going to be equally as mysterious, even if consciousness is like
mm,
a single fundamental entity. Well, what makes up consciousness? We're like, I don't know. It's a single fundamental entity. You can't explain it.
mm, mm.
As opposed to if we
Yeah.
said consciousness is a composite that is emergent from some more fundamental stuff, and you ask, well, how does the fundamental stuff do that? You're like, I don't know, same problem. But to me, there doesn't seem to be any difference in explanatory power of saying it's one essence of fundamental mysterious stuff versus a mysterious property of a combination of fundamental stuff. doesn't seem to be any difference here in explanatory power.
Yeah, so I think I'm not talking about the efficient cause of a thing, that kind of explanatory power. I'm more concerned with, I think, what would be called the formal cause of the thing. What is it? And I don't see how how a person can assert that a concept, whether it's of redness or of justice or of whatever. I don't see how one can assert that when I say concept, that the objective concept, the objective content of that is the same as the objective content of a neuron firing. It's like saying, I think that black is blue.
Well, I wanted to get
well,
away
show
from
me
the
the
neurons.
contradiction in that.
Well, I wanted to get away from the neurons because that's not part of the argument here. The
Yeah,
specific
sure.
neurology is a separate, more technical debate, and the consensus of every brain-related field, cognitive science, philosophy of mind, neurology, it's all physical. Everybody in that field agrees it's physical. It's with a huge majority. But so that's a different topic. But my argument is more in general. What is your problem with thinking of conscious experience as a composite of non-conscious experience things? Doesn't matter if it's matter or not. Matter and neurons is a separate topic, as opposed to it being a singular entity, essence-y thing. Because to me, I don't see a problem that you've presented with saying consciousness could be a composite. And then we can say whatever, we can just make up a substance to be the composite. You can just grant that there is souls and it's a composite of different varieties of soul stuff. But there doesn't seem to be a problem you presented with consciousness being fundamentally a composite.
Yeah, well, so maybe to be more precise, I don't think that consciousness is a substance or a thing that exists in itself. I think that consciousness is an activity of a substance. That is to say, there is something which is conscious or which knows things, which exercises an activity. So I don't think that consciousness belongs to the genus of substances, of things which exist in themselves. I think that the consciousness is the operation of a substance.
I don't quite follow that.
So which is why I say, if I say I think or I know or I am conscious of something, the substance is I, and thinking or consciousness is the operation, which belongs to me. It's the operation of a substance. It gets down to, I don't know if you're familiar with the categories of Aristotle. Aristotle looks at being and says, if I want to classify all the things that are out there in reality, how would I divide up reality into the most basic genres, the most basic genuses? And substance would be the first of them, substance being something that exists in itself, not in something else. And then the others are all accidents, meaning things that exist in something else. Unfortunately, everything that I'm going to say now is controversial or is apparently, contradicted by science. But I say that, for example, the redness in the red apple on the table, redness is not a substance. It doesn't exist in itself. It's an accident. It's a thing, a substance which is red. That's or size, quantity. How big is a thing? Well, size doesn't exist in itself. Size is a modification. It's a certain attribute or property of a thing. So I don't know if we are in agreement upon the basic division of being into substance and accidents.
Does size exist?
Yes, but not in itself. Size exists in a thing.
I want to get off the Thomistic language as much as possible. Size is a thing that exists, right? An object has size.
No, I mean, size exists, but I don't think it's a thing. So I think that a thing, in the proper sense, a thing is a substance. A thing is something which exists in itself.
Is a rock a thing?
Yes.
Is a potato a thing?
Yes. But the size of the potato is not a thing. It's a modification of a thing. It is
so like
determination of a quality.
Tallness in and of itself isn't an existing property. Tallness is something we use to describe an existing thing.
Well, so when you say existing property, I agree, because now when you say property, we're in the domain of accidents.
Tallness is not a thing. Tallness is a description of a thing, right?
I would not say it's a description of a thing either, because a description is an act of a person, giving information about something. So I think the first thing that we have to look at, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but when we define something, every definition involves a genus and a specific difference.
The general question here is
Yeah,
consciousness more like a rock where it's an existing thing, whereas consciousness
no,
more like tallness, where it's like a description of a thing?
more like tallness. Yeah,
That
I'd say it's more
that
like tallness.
that doesn't make sense to me because
Yeah.
my conscious experience seems to exist in the same way a rock exists. It is a thing
Mm.
that is in reality in and of itself. And it's not like I'm applying some arbitrary criteria to just describe it. It's like an actually existing thing. So I don't understand why you would see consciousness as not an actually existing thing.
Well, so I see it as so okay. Pardon the Aristotelianism, but I think it's Aristotle who says that the existence of an accident consists in existing in something else. Whatever. I'm not going to go into the terminology, but accidents do not exist in the same way as substances exist. Substances exist in their own right. Accidents exist only insofar as they somehow inhere in a substance. So I think that yes, my conscious mental activity exists. It is in reality. However, it does not exist in itself. It's the activity of a thing which has its own proper existence. I have my own proper existence, and it's I who think. I
Well, I mean, I
exercise the
agree
activity.
consciousness doesn't exist in and of itself because I'm a
Yeah.
physicalist, so I think it's part of a brain. But the
Okay.
consciousness clearly does exist. It's a thing. Like it's not like
It is in reality. Yes, I'm
yeah,
in,
okay.
I'm in agreement
So
there.
so like tallness isn't. There's no such thing as tallness in reality. We can't like find
Well,
tallness and touch it, right?
but no, that's then if you mean by if when you say it's in reality, you mean it's a thing in reality, then I disagree. I think that tallness is also in reality. Uh, but I don't think that tallness is a thing in itself. I don't think that consciousness is a thing in itself that has its own
Where
proper
is
existence.
tallness in reality?
In tall things. So, I'm not going to say that tallness is a reality in the same way that consciousness is a reality, because I think consciousness is something which is absolute. It doesn't require comparison to another thing, whereas tallness does. A person is
Well, that
tall
part
because
that part is irrelevant to me. My part's more on the tallness is in tall things part. So like,
yeah,
do unicorns exist in reality?
no,
Okay. So let's
unless
see.
science discovers
Right.
unicorns on some other planet, but no,
Yeah.
there's no evidence
So
for that.
so why is tallness not like unicorns? Because to me, tallness seems to be no different than I don't know the Klingonness. Like, does Klingonness exist? No, nothing has some property of Klingonness. It's a arbitrary thing we've made up, right?
You mean like when fuzzy things attach themselves to your shirt or whatever?
No, Klingon is in Star Trek. The species in
Oh,
Star Trek called Klingons.
oh, sorry, I have no familiarity with that. Okay. Um,
Um,
so
so there's no such thing as
right.
Klingonness, right? That's not an existing property anywhere in the world.
No, because Klingons don't exist, whatever they
But
are.
if I see someone who kind of resembles a Klingon, I can say, "Oh, you look like you have Klingonness in you," and that would just be incorrect. It would be a false statement because there's no such property to which that corresponds to in reality. It's just an arbitrary label where we make up some similarities, right?
Okay, so I would say that it does in some manner exist and it doesn't, because if you're taking the term in the proper sense, then no, it doesn't exist, and that's a false statement. But if your statement is true, understood, let's say metaphorically, let's say you have in reality there is in you a certain combination of qualities, characteristics which make you resemble this made up thing. Um, those qualities and characteristics in you, which I'm referring to as whatever this thing is, Klingonness, those are real. Even if
Right.
the thing, even if the reference that I'm pointing to is imaginary, the things themselves, which are conformed to this imaginary idea, they are real, and their conformity is real.
Absolutely. So the same thing seems to apply to tallness, where tallness doesn't exist at all, but there's obviously some space between the protons and electrons that stack onto each other that is like a distance shape that we can call tallness, but tallness doesn't exist, just like Klingons don't exist. It's just an
I don't follow you there, because Klingons are whatever these things are. They fall within a completely different genus. They are a thing which, if they existed, they would exist in themselves. just like a rock exists in itself, and a bird, and you and I. But tallness cannot, by definition, by its nature, it can't exist in itself. You're never going to find tallness walking down the street. So there's a difference between the two.
It could be a platonic object or something. There's ways to say that abstract objects could exist. But the point here is that we can make up an abstract description of a thing, and the abstract description does not exist, whether it's tallness or fatness or beauty, potentially. You may be an objectivist about beauty, but we can make up descriptions of things that are in our head that just don't correspond to anything in reality. We're just making stuff up. And to me, tallness and Klingonness and abstract properties are all of that variety, the made up variety. And that there's some actually existing set of properties of things that actually exist in the world. And consciousness is one of those. Rocks are those. Matter is those. Spin is those. Those things really, really, truly exist. And I think that to me, it sounds like you're saying consciousness is of the tallness variety, where it's just a word we made up to describe stuff, but doesn't actually exist in reality.
because I think that tallness exists in reality too. So there's a difference there, which maybe is not one that we can reconcile in the course of this discussion. I don't know if it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, that's the part I'm just totally lost on. Tallness exists in reality is a very confusing concept to me.
Yeah. I mean, the only way in which I would feel a need to make a distinction or to take a step back would be to say, well, I admit that tallness is a relative term. Whereas something like consciousness is absolute. So tallness implies a comparison with something else. Something is tall in relation to something else which is relatively short. Whereas consciousness doesn't imply a relation. It's not, I'm conscious because of my relation to the rock, which is not conscious. So I mean, I would concede that there are differences, but I would still say that both of them are realities.
All right, so I wanted to go back to like the necessary being thing. So I think quantum fields are the necessary being. You think God is the necessary being.
Yep.
Why would, because to me, I think quantum fields are made up of only discovered properties. We've discovered properties. We use those in physics to try to explain reality. We're not allowed to use asserted properties, things that haven't been discovered. Like we can't use leprechauns, magic, miracles, God, omnipotence, pure aseity. None of those properties, because they haven't been discovered or demonstrated, are allowed in physics. The only ones that are allowed are things that have been demonstrated to exist independent of our imagination. So that methodology to me seems like something that's more reasonable to believe in than the God is the necessary being.
So maybe, there's a number of things I could say. What I will say right now is, so I do not see causal explanatory power in a quantum field for producing a kind of being which is essentially of a higher order, which has more perfection. I would say a quantum field is just a thing.
Clarify, because there's lots of technical language.
No, you're gonna disagree with me because you're a materialist, and I think that as a materialist, you think that all things are essentially on an equal plane in terms of perfection. Because everything is basically composed of material stuff, and that's the fundamental aspect of reality is the stuff that things are made of. And if everything's made of the same stuff fundamentally, whether it's particles or quantum fields, then everything is on an essential equality. But I would say that there are some things that are essentially different and more perfect than others. Notably, living beings are more perfect than non-living ones. Beings with the power of sensation and movement, like animals, are more perfect than a piece of grass. And then finally, beings with intelligence and willpower, beings that are able to know and to love, are essentially more perfect than beings that just have sensitive faculties that are able to sense and to have feelings.
Well, obviously, I don't think that perfectness is a thing, but why would quantum fields, suppose perfectness is actually some property in reality, why couldn't quantum fields combine to create more perfect things?
Yeah, well, I think that it's the reason is that something like an intelligent being does not differ from a non-intelligent one merely in degree. It's not like they're within the same, like let's say one body may differ from another in degree of luminosity. One thing is brighter than another, but brightness or darkness is something that consists in different degrees. And so you can go by a little step-by-step process from the one to the other.
Right. So I would agree there. Like saying a quantum field, just adding more quantum fields wouldn't produce consciousness with just enough of them. It's not a quantum thing. I would agree, but I still think like emergence and strong emergence is possible. And so even if it's not an additional kind of conclusion, you can still get consciousness from non-consciousness, life from non-life. That kind of seems like the argument you're making to me is like,
Could you clarify for me? Yeah, I mean, you are right. That is kind of the direction which I'm heading. But could you clarify for me what is this emergence thing that you're talking about?
well, there's multiple different kinds of emergence. Like
Okay.
the strongest kind, strong emergence, is just to say that new properties are generated by combining old properties in a way that is completely unexpected.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I would agree that there's a basis for that. For example, I don't know, in chemistry, that if you take certain kinds of atoms or molecules and then you combine them into a bigger molecule, like whether it's hydrogen, oxygen, and then you get a water
That would
molecule,
be
the
weak
properties.
emergence. So that's
Weak
weak
emergence. Okay.
emergence.
Yeah.
So
So
strong
the
emergence is more
properties.
like
Yeah.
a completely
Yeah.
random, seemingly random
Yeah.
result pops out of two things. So like if you combine
Yeah.
two particles and you get a flower, I don't know, something like that. It's
Yeah.
some not a composite flower, like literally they like just a new thing
Yeah.
pops into existence that we totally didn't expect, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So strong emergence is when if you combine two fields, you get a third field that does something completely different. Like we had no idea.
Yeah.
It does not
Yeah.
in any way. You couldn't just predict this from
Yeah.
combining the property of the two fields. Like we did not in any way expect that.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, I'd say that even if we find such things in physics through experimentation, um, I think what would be reasonable to conclude from that is that there's more to the picture of reality than what we're able to see and sense so far with our instruments. Because I think that there is an absurdity in the idea of, let's say, a completely new and complete and essentially more perfect being resulting randomly from the association of two imperfect beings. So I have two imperfect beings, which are, and then I put them together, and whoa, there's emergent property which is far surpassing anything which the elements that are put together have in themselves. I think there's a jump there from a lower level of perfection to a higher, and it begs the question: what is? I think that every jump from a lower level of perfection to a higher requires an explanatory cause. And to say that it's randomness, to me, that just doesn't work. Randomness is not a cause.
Well, sure. So the randomness part isn't relevant here. So we can say that there's some kind of perfection field or something, and when two, like the strong force and the weak force, combine together, it activates the perfection field and creates something that has more perfection or something. So I don't see a problem with saying that there are two forces, neither of which has any kind of consciousness. They
Yeah.
combine in such a way that produces things that have consciousness. And even if perfection was a
Yeah.
real thing and there's some kind of level of perfection,
Mhm.
that the interactions of these two fields could aggregate perfection in some way to build a more
Mm.
perfect thingy.
Yeah. Well, I'd say we should, with relation to that kind of thing, if we observe something like that, where it seems that two very imperfect things are combining, and all of a sudden there's this very perfect thing that emerges unexpectedly, I would say that's kind of like, I don't know, if let's say I knew nothing about electricity and I observed though someone walking in the room and flicking a switch and the lights turn on, it would be reasonable to think there's probably more going on behind there in terms of causal explanation than
Well, so
just the
I'm
movement
agreeing. I'm agreeing with you. So I'm not.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
getting rid of randomness entirely from
yeah.
there. I'm saying
Okay.
everything is causal. So
Okay.
in this analogy, we're granting that
Yeah.
perfection is a real thing,
Yeah.
and there's some levels of perfection, and there's two
Sure.
objects that have lesser perfection, but they combine in such a way that pulls in more perfection. It builds the perfection,
But
um,
pulls it in from where?
the perfection field. There's a
Okay.
perfection field. I'm trying to,
Yeah.
because I'm a physicalist, so I think
Sure.
if something exists, it exists as a field of some kind. So if perfection
Okay.
exists, it's a field.
Yeah.
So there's some
Okay.
perfection field out there,
Okay.
and we have
Can
two: the strong and the
can we
weak
call that
force.
God? Can we call that God?
Sure, sure, I'm fine with that. But so we take
Okay.
quantum fields,
Yeah.
and these quantum fields. Well, I guess we couldn't because it'd have to be non-conscious for the analogy to work. So there's a
Okay.
perfection field that is
So
non-conscious, and
non-conscious God. Yes.
yeah, a non-conscious God. I'm okay with that one. That one works for
Oh,
me.
okay. As long as he
And
doesn't know you.
yeah, and there's quantum fields, and the quantum fields can pull from this and build a
Okay.
conscious entity like me, even though
Yeah.
the fields are lesser perfections.
Yeah. Yeah. But so I'd say that whatever this perfection field is, it would have to have in itself all the perfection of consciousness, either formally as consciousness or as something even more perfect, if that were possible. But I just don't think that you can get something more perfect from something less perfect unless there's the influence of an outside agent or cause.
Well, like if the perfection field is spread out, every inch has a single unit of perfection, and the conscious entity is like 100 units of
Yeah.
perfection, and it pulls a bunch of units of perfection together. That seems like
Yeah.
it would make sense that if you need 100 units to get perfection, and the
Yeah.
field is just
Yeah.
1 unit every inch or whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, so I think that as long as you are a materialist, I acknowledge, I don't think I'm going to be able to lead you to, acknowledge the need for the sort of being that theists describe as God, because we're talking about a being which is not material, which is intelligent, which is perfectly simple, not composed of parts, that the argumentation for that relies upon, I think, accepting the premise that there are essentially different kinds of being, there are essentially different grades of perfection, and that you can't get an essentially higher grade from essentially lower grade. And if we don't agree on those premises, it's true, we're not going to get to God. I do think that's true.
Well, I think my several problems I would have there is one, those are asserted properties, not discovered properties. So I could just assert an alternative property, say the spaghetti. There's a spaghetti particle, and things are more or less spaghetti. And in order to explain the universe, since everything has a some level of spaghettiness, you need the essence of the spaghetti monster must have created the universe or something.
Okay.
But clearly, that's just something I made up. There's no
Sure.
reason to believe that's the case. And so I would say that we should reject all asserted properties and only use discovered properties, which is why science does that, and history and all of the scientific fields are only allowed to do that because it's a better methodology.
Okay.
And I think that even if I granted a lot of your premises, I could still show that the universe as we see it today is explainable with either different variations of your asserted properties, like the one I stated where there's like the perfection thingy exists as not conscious, but it's just separated. And if you can pull it together, you can build conscious beings from a lesser perfection because it's additive in that case. The perfection would be additive.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. So I would see first problem is I don't think there's any reason to believe there is such a thing. It's asserted and not discovered. So we should probably prefer science. And second is we can probably make variations that are equally plausible to explain it just fine, like panpsychism, which is the spread out field.
Yeah, well, I guess panpsychism, I'm glad you're bringing that up. As I understand it, that would assert that consciousness is essentially a kind of field, right? And a thing becomes conscious when maybe it has a sufficient concentration of consciousness in it. But I think that is where the debate breaks down. Is I can never accept the idea that consciousness is essentially a field. I mean, that's because, and I can't. It's like if you were to ask me to accept that black is blue or something like that, and you would say, "Prove to me the contradiction there." Well, I can't prove it because it's evident to me, and it's not possible to prove everything because some things have to be self-evident. There have to be first principles. There have to be things which don't require any further explanation or going further back. And to me, it seems to be self-evident that consciousness is not reducible to a field or any physical entity. And again, I can't, I'm not going to pull out a syllogism which says, A, B, C, therefore.
What do you mean by self-evident in this context? Because to me, I think that obviously I have consciousness. I have cogito ergo sum. I think consciousness exists, but that doesn't tell me anything about what it's made of, or whether it's a composite or a singular entity or a unity of some things or a field. Like, I'm open to all of those. They're all logically possible. And I don't understand what it means to say it's self-evident that you can isolate which of the various possibilities is necessarily the correct one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a few things there. The whole cogito ergo sum. So that's interesting. To take that as the basis of epistemology. Would you assert, if I can ask a question in response, would you assert that there's a real distinction between the cogito and the sum? That is to say,
no, they're synonyms.
they're synonyms. Okay. So in fact,
So like the I and the thinking are the same
Yeah,
thing. So it's not an
right.
argument. It's a description of an experience. So I'm
Okay,
not
so
so like if it was
right.
presented as an argument and you're supposed to accept it because of the conclusion, then it would be circular,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's simply a sentence describing that you have experience and the experience exists.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I think it is self-evident that we have experience.
I
I
agree
would
there,
accept that as a
100%.
self. Yeah, good, good. I don't think though that it's correct to identify the thinking subject with the action of thought. So I don't think it's correct to say that I am my consciousness.
I think that's
Um,
the minimum criterion. So for example,
yeah.
if all that existed was just the consciousness and it was producing the thinking, then you would be your consciousness. Now, obviously, I think I'm a physicalist, so I think consciousness is a product of physical brains, and so the physical brain exists. But for the purpose of an epistemic starting point, the only
Mhm.
thing you can say is that you are your thinking, whatever that happens to be.
Well, I think you can assert there is thinking. This activity happens. I think
Yeah.
that is self-evident because we have the power to reflect on our own activity. So I see the red apple on the table, and then with my mind I reflect on the action of that perception or that thought.
Right. And would you say
But
that the the thinking, the reflection,
mm,
is a thought,
yes, yeah, for sure.
and you, the term "you," refers to that thought.
No, that's where I don't agree because I think that the term "you" or "I" it refers to a being which has thought, which exercises an activity. Kind of like when I run, for example. Let's take this as an example. I run, therefore I am. Okay, it's stupid. Maybe it's not self-evident that I run, but is running? Am I identified with my act of running? Is that me?
Mm, no, but I don't think I agree. Running is like tallness; it's not a thing. But I think a thought is a literal thing. But that goes back to our previous conversation.
Yeah, and that's I just I don't see how that's possible
Well,
because
because I would think
even
I
yeah,
would say that thought is synonymous with direct experience or qualia. You know the term qualia,
well,
qualia
yeah,
experience.
sure,
So like
yeah,
what it's like to be X.
yeah, yeah.
So I would say my experience of the TV is a thought. My experience of the color
Mm,
red is a thought. All of my experiences are thoughts. And so I
mm.
see thought as qualia experience.
So, but that's interesting because you obviously each of us has many thoughts that we think.
Yeah. Yes.
So are we
The
the
collection of thoughts.
aggregate, the collection of the thoughts,
Yes.
or a collection of thoughts?
Yes. And I would say that for the purpose of the
Yeah,
cogito, the only
yeah.
thought that exists is that I exist. And so um, since it's the meant to, as a starting point for epistemology, you have to exclude all the other factors, as many as possible, to make it as simple as possible. And so, in the
Mm,
context of that argument, the only thought is I exist, and so you are that thought and nothing else, because that's the only thing in the argument.
okay. So the other thoughts that you may have had before, they're not you anymore.
They may or may not be. Those are
Okay.
doubtable, but that thought, at the very least, has to be a part of you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess so. I think we're constantly coming back to a distinction that I want to make between a thing which exists in its own right, a substance, and then some modification or activity of the thing, which I think just belongs to a completely different genre. Um, and I can't accept the idea. I can't prove it to you, but I cannot accept the idea that I am my own thought. To me, I think there's a reason why. I mean, obviously, grammatically, it doesn't work because grammatically, if I express something like I think, there is a subject in the sentence and there's a verb, there's an action. But I think that grammar reflects the laws of thought, and the laws of thought reflect reality. Um, and this is part of my trust in common sense. I think that common sense is an intuitive grasping of reality, and so we can look at the way that even that we arrange the grammar of a sentence and say that's actually based on fundamental realities. And there's a reason why there's a distinction between the pronoun I and then the verb think. It's because there's a real difference between the two. But beyond asserting that, I don't think that I can put together a syllogism for you there.
Do you think we're not a collection of thoughts or consciousness? Like, do you think that we are
Correct.
like, what would it mean for us to be more than qualia?
Um, it would mean um, that the qualia, the different things or experiences that we have, belong to something which is us.
Well, so like if our qualia didn't exist, what would be left?
Just the substance without the qualia. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what is that? Like what does it mean? Because for me,
Yeah.
when I think of myself, I think of the
Yeah.
qualia experience. If I have no qualia
Yeah.
experience, I don't exist. Um,
Yeah.
and so
So
to
when
me,
you are asleep, do you not exist?
no, I still have quality experience. I just don't remember it. So like, um, the generation, like if we stopped all conscious experience, then yes, I would not exist. Now there's still a thing there
Okay.
that could generate more conscious experience in the future, so I could come
So
back into existence.
now that's interesting. What is that thing? What is that thing?
Brain, the physical
It's
brain.
but it's not you.
No, because I am the conscious experience. So like if I could
Okay.
take my conscious
Yeah.
experience now and
Yeah.
transfer it into a computer, I would be in the computer, not the brain anymore. So the brain is a means to generate the conscious experience. And
Yeah.
I am the conscious experience. So like I would not mind losing my brain as long as I could keep my conscious experience. Like, right? Wouldn't you agree that the conscious experience is more important than the brain?
In the sense that it's more perfect, but not in the sense that it's more fundamental. The brain's more fundamental. The experience is more perfect because it's an added it's a perfection which is added on top of the brain itself. But I wouldn't reduce the mind to the physical brain, but that's a whole other issue.
Oh, well, we can ask the
But
same question about the
it's
soul.
kind of
Say
like
there's the
yeah.
soul and the quality experience. If you could keep the quality experience but get rid of the soul, which one wouldn't you prefer the quality experience?
Well, I think that's kind of like saying if you could have a square circle, what would you do with it? Well, there's a contradiction involved in the very notion
But you
of a square
admitted that
circle.
you could get rid of the quality experience and still have the soul.
Yes, but I don't admit the inverse. That is to say, I don't admit that you can have the quality experience, but not the soul.
Well, that doesn't seem to be that's not a logical
Just like
contradiction.
just like I can let's put it this way. I can, it is possible for me not to be seated or not to, but it's not possible for there to be seatedness without me.
Well, I'd say it's the analogy is more like saying the chair could be made of metal or the chair could be made of wood. So like
Mhm,
conscious experience could be made of soul stuff, or conscious
mhm,
experience could be made of matter, or conscious experience could be made of computer stuff. And so to say that you could remove the consciousness, the quality experience, I agree it would have to be made of something. It can't just be, I mean,
mhm,
it could be essence, but to say that you could remove the conscious experience from the soul and put it in like a computer or whatever,
mhm,
I'd say that'd be perfectly fine. I would still prefer to have the quality experience because it's more important than the soul stuff, independent of
mhm,
what makes the quality experience. And so it
mhm,
doesn't seem like a logical contradiction to say that the quality experience could be moved or transferred or made of something other than the soul stuff, in which
mhm,
case, if I had to choose between the two, I would prefer the conscious experience. Just like if I had the option, would I rather have my brain or my conscious experience? I'd like give me the conscious experience. I don't care what it's
yeah,
made of. It seems
yeah.
that seems to be more fundamentally me.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I think it seems to be more fundamentally you because you can only know yourself by means of conscious experience. So, but I don't think that because it's your means of knowing yourself that therefore it is you. I think that those two things are distinct. And
I
I
don't
agree. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I don't quite follow that because to me, consciousness is defined as what it's like to be X, or is it like something to be X? And so if you don't have consciousness, then there's nothing it's like to be you,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to eliminate the you. There's no more you. If there's
Mm-mm.
nothing it's like to be you, then you don't exist as far as I
Mm.
can tell.
Okay. Kind of like if is it kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, then did it really fall? Is it like that? Um,
Well, I no, because I'm a materialist, so I think it definitely, if a tree falls in the forest, it definitely made a sound, whether
okay.
someone's heard it or not.
Okay. That's good. I
If
do agree with you there. We have some
if
common ground.
consciousness doesn't exist, and consciousness is defined as what it's like to be you,
Yeah. Well,
and
yeah. I guess I should have jumped in there and said, well, no, I don't accept that definition of consciousness. So,
okay,
consciousness is the action, the operation by which we experience or we reflect upon our own mental activity. It's the I would define it, I would put it in the in the genus of an operation, of an action, and say it's an action by which I'm aware of my own, my own activity and even my own qualia, whatever.
Okay, so qualia is specifically defined as what it's like to be you. So would you say that without that, you would still exist?
Well, so no, because in that case, what we're talking about, I think, is what I would understand as the properties of a thing, which is attributes or qualities that the thing has necessarily. And I do admit, certainly, a thing cannot exist without those qualities or attributes which it has necessarily. Yeah. And so, if consciousness is a necessary attribute of my human being, my human existence, then it's true I can't exist without consciousness if it's a necessary attribute. But I think that at least the radical capacity to be conscious is a necessary attribute, but I don't think it's necessary that I exercise that capacity, that power at every moment. I think there are moments when I'm not actually conscious, like when I'm asleep, and maybe there's some dream activity going on, but I wouldn't really call that consciousness.
But would you say it's the most important one? Like if you could never have that
Well,
one, all the other ones are kind of like not as important.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like saying, okay, what is more important, to eat or to philosophize? Right now we're philosophizing, and it's great. But if you don't eat, you can't philosophize because you'll die. So I'd say the answer to the question, what's more important, is, well, you have to make a distinction and say, eating is maybe more fundamental, because if I don't do that, I can't have the rest. But philosophizing is more perfect. I eat in order to be able to philosophize. I don't philosophize in order to be able to eat. So I'd say, likewise with consciousness and the existence of my substance, which thinks, it's more fundamental that I exist, because without existing, I can't be conscious of anything. But the consciousness is a perfection which is added to my existence. So a conscious being is more perfect than an unconscious one. It's the end, the purpose of being is in order to be able to exercise intellectual and moral activity.
But you agree, if you could not ever be conscious, then you would not exist.
Let's say I have to distinguish, because if I lacked the radical capacity to exercise consciousness, then I would not exist. I would not be a human being. I think that belongs to the definition of human being.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
the point of this argument is that that's the one of the essential criteria. Now, it doesn't say anything about other criteria. There may be other criterion. Like I obviously think I'm a brain, so obviously I have the capacity to be unconscious of things. But one of the necessary essential qualities is consciousness. And so the cogito specifically as a starting point is simply saying, here is the first necessary criterion of existence. Not whether or not we have others is a different part of the argument. It's just a starting point.
Yeah.
So the point of the cogito is just, I exist, I am the thoughts, meaning that the quality experience of what it's like to be me is an essential property of my existence, independent of what the other ones may or may not be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think awareness of yourself or of your thoughts and so on is, let's say, it might be one of the first things in the order of becoming aware of reality, in the order of knowledge. I don't think it's the first thing in the order of being. I think you have to be first, and then you can.
Oh yeah,
be
I would
conscious.
agree. I would say that consciousness is a result of physical matter. So I don't think consciousness is the fundamental thing. It's just the epistemic starting point.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do have a problem with taking cogito ergo sum as the starting point, because I think that even more fundamental to that is something like the principle of non-contradiction, which is that a thing cannot be and not be at the same time in the same respect. I think that that's even more evident than or more fundamental than cogito ergo sum, because if the principle of non-contradiction is false, then I could have conscious experience and also not think and not have conscious experience at the same time. So I think that, in fact, Aristotle was right to put the principle of non-contradiction at the beginning of human knowledge, rather than some kind of experience of oneself thinking.
Well, I mean, I agree it's at knowledge, but knowledge is a justified true belief. First, you have to have beliefs. and then they have to be justified to be knowledge. So I think that
Mm.
first we start with the beliefs. Or first start with the direct experience, because you can have experience without beliefs, like ants or whatever. And then from the experience you get language and beliefs, which is where I think logic comes from. Like logic is a
Mm.
language we use to describe our experiences. And then from that you infer the laws of
Mm.
logic to get justification. And then once you get to that point, now you start getting knowledge. But that's a
Mm.
epistemically, the starting point is the experience and then the beliefs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm in agreement with you in the sense that if we never experienced anything outside of ourselves, if we never experienced, if we never had perception of something, of some kind of being, then we could not know even the principle of non-contradiction. So it's true that first we grasp, we apprehend some being, and then immediately we realize, well, being is not non-being. This thing is not the contradictory of what it is. But I still think it's true, though, that in the order of knowledge, so that's kind of a temporal progression by which we come to know things. But it's also true that in the order of knowledge, I think that non-contradiction is more fundamental than anything else that I might assert. Because even if I assert something as true, like I think, that implies that thinking is not the same as non-thinking. So I think one would have to distinguish different orders of reality, and in the order of, temporally speaking, how do I first acquire knowledge? Well, it does start with the perception of something, but in the order of justifying one's affirmations, in the order of proof, the most fundamental thing, which is at the basis of all other proofs, would be the principle of non-contradiction.
Well, I'd say identity and then non-contradiction, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that's another thing which is debated, but I don't think we have to go into that unless you want to.
Well, you did mention the fine-tuning argument earlier on.
Sure, sure.
Why do you think
Yeah.
that fine-tuning would be evidence of a God? Because I don't think, I think that the fine-tuning is, one, it's a self-defeating argument, and two is
Yeah.
that it's equally as explainable from a naturalistic perspective. I think it's better
Yeah.
explained by a naturalistic perspective.
Yeah. I haven't looked at a lot of your videos, but I did see there was like a 60-second clip on fine tuning. So I did watch that. That was interesting. And I think what you were saying is basically, if there's a fine tuner or an intelligence which produces a universe which is finely tuned, well, what fine tuned the fine tuner? If I understand you well, that would seem to be the objection. I would say that so intelligent beings are able to provide a satisfactory causal explanation for non-intelligent things which are well ordered. Like if I come across, a painting of, a Mona Lisa, or if I walk into the Sistine Chapel, what I see there is a bunch of things which are non-intelligent, pigments, paint, which is arranged in a certain very specified way to fulfill a purpose. It's a work of art. It's beautiful. And I think it's legitimate to say, well, this requires a causal explanation. It is contingent. It's not, things don't have to be this way. And the only adequate causal explanation is an intelligent being. It's not, wind, erosion, whatever. I think it is valid to make the same argument with regard to the universe. If, science demonstrates that, the fundamental forces and constants of nature are the way they are, but they have to be that way in order for complex life to emerge or something like that. I would say that is an analogous situation to finding a beautiful work of art or something like that. Things they have to be just the way they are in order for the best result to come about, and that doesn't happen by chance. That would be my argument there.
Well, so the first problem I would have is like the pattern. So say there's some kind of a pattern we see. If we want to know if that pattern is best explained by design or not, the first thing we would have to know is that pattern common or determined? Because if it's common or determined or random, and there's a whole bunch of different instances that would equate to that. So like say a dice rolls a 100. There's a 100-sided die, then that's fully explained by naturalism. So naturalism, there's a bunch of different options that can explain that, regardless of what the pattern is. So any pattern we see is going to have all of these different variations. And to know which is the best explanation, you'd have to know the background information of the system. So like if we see words written down, we can infer that's made by a mind, because finding words is not a result of any natural process we know of. And so it's inferable that it's product of a mind, not a natural process. However, if we went to a planet that the wind naturally writes out potato everywhere, then we'd say, okay, that's probably not by a mind, that's probably the wind did this. And so the same thing would apply to the universe. So if we're saying that the universe is finely tuned because if any of the constants were changed even slightly, life wouldn't come about, well, we'd have to know, is this a result of a natural combination of forces? Is it a result of just multiverse or random, or one random iteration of a bunch of random iterations, or is it a result of a mind? And if you say a mind is the best explanation, the problem this causes is that for each different possible way the universe could be, both life permitting and non-life permitting, there could be a God who could want that particular universe. And so to say that God would want a universe with life, his nature must be equally as fine-tuned as the universe that produces life.
Yeah, I think there's maybe two different ways in which I'd want to respond to this, which are, I hope, complementary. One is to say that, I don't think that there's an, infinite number of, let's say, divine beings, each of which would want to, theoretically, each of which would want to produce a different kind of universe, and that there's, there could be a God who would want to produce, a completely wretched, meaningless universe, which is just, a bunch of things flying around doing nothing in particular. I think that intelligence, it's a property of intelligence to always wish the best, the most perfect. And, an intelligent artisan is one who produces works of beauty. And so, I think that there is a difference between a universe which is beautiful and well ordered and one which is not. I think that when you find beauty and order, you can logically conclude that an intelligence is behind it, because it is a property of intelligence to produce that kind of thing and not just randomness. So
those seem like separate properties to me, like intelligence and the desire for intelligence to do particular kinds of things seem completely separate topics, separate properties.
But I don't think that, let's say beauty and order, I don't think that they are just a particular kind of thing on the same plane as other possible arrangements. Like I don't see, let's say a piece of art as just, well, that's that random arrangement of things which is just as good or just as bad as any other possible arrangement of pigments on a board. I think there's a qualitative difference, and there, something which is more perfect. This goes back to the whole perfection thing. I think that perfection is something real, and that something which is more perfect is qualitatively different and better, different from and better than something which is less perfect.
Well, that would be fine. But my argument here is more specifically that in order for God to have intelligence and use that intelligence to make universe X as opposed to universe Y, it would need some desire to do so. And this desire is an extra property you've added into God. So God has power to create universes. Let's say he has power. And power doesn't tell you which kind of universe he would create, right? He could just, power is equally as likely to create a universe of potatoes as a universe of black holes or life or whatever. And the universe applies the same thing. Just the fact there is a universe or there is a multiverse doesn't tell us anything about what kind of properties it's going to create. The universe of black holes is exactly the same as the universe of potatoes, exactly the same as the universe of life. But if you want to say God has some extra property, now you're adding a property to God to say he has a personality of some kind, intelligence or beauty, desiring or whatever, that he would select this particular kind of universes over this particular kind of universes. But in order to create, to maintain parity of the analogy, you'd have to do the same to the universe and say, okay, so we're going to add a new law of the universe. Let's call it the fine structure constant. And the fine structure constant binds the different laws of physics together such that they're going to maintain a proportional relationship, which would then produce life. And so if we just take the bare theory of God with just all powerful enough to create the universe, it tells us nothing about the kind of universe he'd create. And so the logical possibility of him creating a life-permitting universe is the exact same as black holes. And the same thing applies to the multiverse, where it's the logical possibility of it creating a universe of life is the same as black holes. It's just one out of infinite. But if you want to add this extra property to specify the kind of universe God would create, in order to make it a parity, you have to do the same thing to the multiverse and say there's some kind of property in the multiverse that determines it to make this particular kind of universe as opposed to the other.
Yeah, I think we have to find an ultimate causal explanation. You can't go back forever. And if you say, well, this universe is which is fine tuned is explained by some kind of random universe generator. You have to find ultimately some principle which is one and which is simple. And so I would acknowledge that from our point of view in God, his power and his wisdom or goodness or whatever, they are, from our point of view, different things. We have to conceive of them as if they were different realities. But I would say it's essential to the very notion of God that he is perfectly simple, in such a way that all of his attributes, which we grasp differently, power and wisdom and all these other things, they're actually one and the same reality in him.
Well, my argument isn't against the simplicity of God here, specifically
Okay.
that
Okay.
if you want to say that God explains the fine tuning,
Yeah.
the reason he explains the fine tuning is because you've added this extra property that doesn't have any evidence to determine his
Well,
nature to prioritize this
the-
kind of universe.
The evidence for adding the property of intelligence is precisely the need for there to be a causal explanation of what we do observe in reality. That is to say, I don't look at reality and then say, well, what can I directly observe, which is able to explain reality? Maybe I can't
Right.
directly
So
observe
just
it.
clarify.
Yeah,
So you're saying
yeah.
that the fine tuning we see, you explain it because you've made up this property that determines it to do this fine tuning. But the reason that doesn't work is because we can do the same thing under naturalism. I can say there is the fine
Mhm.
structure constant. This isn't the multiverse. This is just
Mhm.
one universe. The
Okay.
fine structure constant, which causes all the laws of physics to have a proportional relationship. They're tied together. So
Mhm.
if you change one, the
Yeah,
others are going to proportionally change, which
mhm.
would make
Yeah, yeah,
this universe
yeah,
more likely than the others. So if you're
yeah.
saying that the evidence for God is
Mhm.
that him having this particular nature that would create life explains life,
Mhm.
we can say the evidence for the fine structure constant is that the fine structure constant having this nature would produce an evidence or universe of life, and that's what we see. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the fact that you're using this property to be an explanation of the data works equally as well for the fine
Sure.
structure constant as it does for a particular nature
Yeah,
of God.
yeah.
And so it doesn't seem you have to explain why does God have that particular nature as opposed to any of the infinitely many other logically possible ones, and we have to do the same thing
Yeah.
on our side.
Yeah. Okay. So I let's say want to make a clarification about what I'm asserting about God, and then I think there's maybe two different aspects or angles from which I could reply to your objection. I think that, let's say, in God, there must be a certain assembly of perfections or attributes which are sufficient, which are able to account for the universe as an effect of God's power and so on. But I do not think that God, his divine nature, is determined in such a way that the universe results necessarily from what God is. I think that the creation of the universe is a free decision made by an intelligent being, which did not have to happen. God did not have to choose to create the universe, and so it's not like God is a sort of being which necessarily results in the universe.
Right. That part would
Um,
be irrelevant to the argument. So whether you wanted to make it necessary or
sure,
probabilistic, that would be equal on both.
sure,
So that's not
sure,
part of their
sure.
criticism.
Second point would be that. So let's imagine. Okay, so what is this? The fine.
Structure
What is
constant.
the fine structure constant? Let's imagine that there is some kind of one single constant, which is determined in such a way that all the other parts of fine tuning are a direct result of it. So now we've reduced our causal explanation to one thing.
Well,
I
it can
do.
be a range, so you can make it probabilistic just like you can for God, where it's not determined; it's just more
Okay.
likely.
Okay. Well, I would like to talk about the term probabilistic, but that's another thing. So let's say there's a range of possibilities, and we fall at this point in the range, and that results in all the other constants of the universe being finely tuned, and that results in life and whatever. So we've reduced our causal explanation to one thing. I do find it interesting that there is this need to seek, when we're looking for ultimate causal explanation, I find it's interesting that we always look for one thing. And this was kind of seemed to be the case with the singularity, which was hypothesized to be behind the Big Bang. Okay, why is it one thing? Which is, I think it's interesting that there's this search for unity.
Well, I'm making a parody argument. I'm trying to mirror your argument as
Sure,
much as possible. So the reason I'm using
sure.
one thing is just
Yeah,
instead of using the
yeah, yeah.
multiverse, which is infinite
Yep,
things, I'm saying that we can explain
yep,
this with one thing also
yeah.
from a
So,
naturalist perspective
yeah,
without
yeah.
God.
Right. That's okay. I just observed that in passing, but I think that every time that there is something which is limited in perfection, which has a certain degree of perfection or a certain degree of this or that, and not more, that is a clear sign of contingency of being caused. Everything which is limited by that very fact, um, in Aristotelian philosophy, would say it's composed of potency and act, and because it's composed, it's contingent. This
I'm
goes back
lost
to
on
Einstein's.
the
Yep,
analogy here.
sure.
So God has a nature that
Yep.
makes him prefer life permitting universes. That would, to me, I'd say that is a limit. He's limited to want life permitting universes. Now you can call
It's
that. I don't care.
yeah.
I don't care
So
if you call that limited or not. But my point here is
yeah.
that if there's a law of physics that does the exact same thing, whatever you want to call God, we're going to have to call the
Mm-mm.
law to make it fair. So you're not allowed to call this contingent because it's
Mm.
doing the exact same thing that God's nature is doing
Yeah.
to prefer a life permitting universe here.
Okay. Yeah. So I think if it's a law, so maybe I misunderstood you. I thought that you were referring to maybe an existing thing, an object, which is somehow just the right kind of thing to make everything else work. And so I was going to say, I was going to take an approach based on that understanding. If you're saying it's a law, um,
What it's made of here is irrelevant. All that matters is that it's
yeah,
doing the exact same thing God's nature is doing. So God's nature of
yeah,
intelligence or whatever causes him
yeah.
to prioritize life permitting universes as opposed to not life
Mm,
permitting
mm,
universes, right? So in this
mm,
case, this law or
yeah,
whatever you want to call it prioritizes life permitting universes as opposed to non-life permitting universes. The reason why is irrelevant. What
mm,
it's made of is irrelevant. All
mm,
that
mm,
matters is that it accomplishes the exact same task to
yeah,
explain the priority over life permitting
yeah.
universes.
Yeah, let's imagine that law exists. I don't think that such a law could be self-explanatory. Well, first of all, because if it's a law, a law isn't a thing, and the question arises from whence does the law come? How does it have its power to I think that laws always presuppose a being which actually exists, which is a thing, and which is responsible for those laws. Just as obviously with human laws, civil laws, there's a legislator.
Well, I
Um,
think I get your argument here, which is that
yeah.
the law could be other ways, which I agree, but God's
Hmm.
nature could be other ways. And so if your
Well,
argument
that's
is
what I don't agree with.
wait,
Yeah,
one
yeah,
second,
yeah,
just to clarify,
yeah. Go
the
ahead. Go ahead.
fact
Yeah.
that if you want to argue that because the law could be other ways, therefore it requires a
Mm.
designer of some kind,
Yes.
I
Yes.
would then argue that because I can imagine God's nature being other ways, he could want a universe of nothing but
Yeah,
black holes or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Therefore, God's nature could be different. And so if
Yeah.
your only argument is that because I can imagine it being
Mm,
different, therefore it could be
mm.
different, that must also apply to
No.
God.
Well, no. It's not that. It's not a question of imagination. Because just because you can imagine something being different, so let's say I can imagine the law being different without there being an internal contradiction.
Sure.
Let's say the law doesn't have to be that way, and if it's different, there's no internal contradiction. So, in fact, my imagination, my imaginatory power, which conjures up a number of different possible laws, that corresponds to reality. It doesn't involve any internal contradiction.
Then I would
Um,
go with I can imagine God wanting a different universe without a logical contradiction.
so there, I'd make a distinction, which is that God wanting another universe which is good and beautiful and so on, that doesn't involve any contradiction. I agree. But God wanting a universe which is purposeless, meaningless, which has no beauty and no order, that I think does involve a contradiction with the attribute of God, which is wisdom.
I'd say I can have a God without wisdom or defined wisdom differently.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so I think if you define wisdom differently, then I just go back to whatever term you want to use that means wisdom, in the sense that I mean it. But
Well, so
if you
let me put it
speak
this
of
way. Let's
God
say
without wisdom, yeah, yeah.
I can say that you being able to imagine a universe is actually a logical contradiction with this law because this law entails any difference would be a logical contradiction.
Mm-mm. Well, I think there is a contradiction there because the universe is of such a sort of such a nature that it is possible for it to be otherwise.
God is of such a nature that it's possible to be otherwise.
That's what I disagree with.
Well, I can
That's
say I disagree with your definition of a universe that it could be possible otherwise too. So I can just mirror one-to-one every aspect of your argument.
Well,
But
no, because this goes back to the idea of divine simplicity and then the God being a necessary being versus the universe, which is not simple and not necessary.
well, I can just say it
And
is.
I can,
This
yeah,
law
yeah.
is perfectly simple and perfectly necessary, and doesn't God, and it describes the
Well,
universe as defined structure constant.
so I think, okay, I don't think it's possible to say that a law is simple or necessary. I think that there's an internal contradiction in both of those things.
Well, I'm
I
using a
think
different
that,
definition of those things that doesn't include what I consider from begging the question on your end. So I think that
okay,
my alternative definition of simplicity,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
of
yeah.
kind, ontological kind, and would defines your God as incredibly unsimple. So an all-powerful being
Okay,
is going
okay,
to say that such a being is infinitely complex. The number of things it can
okay.
do are going to define its complexity, not
So
its ontological essence. And so
yeah,
my definition of simplicity
mhm,
seems to have equally as much credibility of yours, which is I'd consider zero. I don't think either of these have any
okay,
credibility. But
okay,
we can
okay,
create alternative definitions of
yeah,
simplicity and simply
yeah,
define our thing as perfectly simple, and then say because it's perfectly simple and that is
mm,
arbitrarily entailed in the necessary being, which it's not. There's no
mm,
reason to
mm,
think that that's
mm,
entailed. We can have equally as asserted solutions to the problem. But
mm,
again,
mm.
because that seems to be all we're doing is making up definitions, neither of these are supported. And I'd go back to, well, we
Yeah,
should probably just stick with discovered properties, not asserted ones.
yeah, okay. I don't think that my definition of simple is arbitrary. I think I define simple as not being composed of parts. I think that's inherent in the notion of simple as it's commonly understood and accepted.
I don't
Um,
think so. Like, I don't. There isn't like a philosophically definition accepted definition. Like,
yeah,
based on most philosophers, they disagree that God is simple. They pretty much everybody thinks God is literally the most complicated thing possible, and only an
okay.
incredibly small minority of Thomists think that
Yeah,
God is simple
those
because they
poor
define
Thomas. Yeah,
simplicity.
yeah, yeah.
Well, they define simplicity in a more complicated way. That
Okay.
if God could create infinitely many universes, the amount of power is a representation of his simplicity, making him infinitely many complex. And so, because simplicity in this context is more described as the ability to do work or something,
Mhm.
that it's far less simple. That's why we don't use simplicity when assessing the ontological existence of a thing. It's not really a relevant concept.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't know. To me, that it seems like a very relevant concept. For example, if I have, I don't know, um, if I have a pile of rocks, I don't know why I always go back to that, but if I have a pile of rocks, is that simple or is that complex?
I don't like based on my epistemology, it's not a relevant property. I don't think there is such a
Okay.
property.
Okay.
Like I think
I,
simple is kind of like
yeah,
tallness. It's just a thing we apply. It doesn't. There's no such thing.
yeah, right. I see. So simplicity is just it's a non-entity. It has no meaning.
Yes,
Or do you think that's when I say simple? Do you think that there is a relevant use of the term simple? That simple can mean something, which
sure.
is relevant.
We can make meanings of it, but
But
like
as it's commonly used, it's irrelevant. It's a
it doesn't have
non-word.
any. Well, it's a word, but I don't think it has any relevance to the fundamental nature of reality. So if we said the fundamental nature of reality is perfectly simple, or the fundamental nature of reality is the most complex thing imaginable,
Yeah.
I would prefer neither hypothesis, because to
Okay.
me, it doesn't make a difference. Like whether or not
Yeah.
something was simple versus complex doesn't tell us or doesn't give us any reason to think one is a more likely correspondence to the fundamental nature. Um,
Yeah. So I guess the argument, so simplicity is relevant because when a thing is complex, there is, let's say, a union of different elements which are not identical. And the problem is that different elements do not tend of their very nature to associate or unite themselves with another. You
if they're
need,
necessary, they do.
um, could you explain that?
Well, so I had on Rob Coons. He's a very famous Thomist,
Okay.
uh, and we
Yeah.
were talking about different possibilities of necessary beings, and it's possible to have a plurality of necessary beings and necessary
Mhm.
relationships between those beings, such
Mm.
that It's the most complicated being possible, and it's the fundamental nature of reality.
Hmm.
And so, in the way that you think of simplicity as not composed of parts, you could have the exact opposite of that, and it could be the fundamental nature of reality. And there's no logical contradiction there, and there's no reason to
Hmm.
think that simplicity would be a more likely explanation here.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there is this interesting philosophical problem of the one and the many. And I would say that unity is fundamentally, let's say, it's prior to, and it's a more powerful causal explanation than multiplicity. And when you have multiple things can proceed from one cause, but you don't have a thing which is essentially one proceeding from a multiplicity. It's like maybe I should put it this way. Maybe it's a silly analogy, but every government which enacts laws, which which enacts laws, every government does so insofar as it is one. Whether it be that there is only one person who has power, like in a monarchy, or whether it be that there are many people who share power, but insofar as they act, they have to be one by coming to an agreement. And that's why you have debate, discussion, and you take a vote, and then the government is at least representatively one. I think that unity is a more powerful and a more fundamental thing than multiplicity, and that multiplicity can proceed from something which is one, but not the other way around.
Well, right. There can't be like a fundamentally many and a fundamentally one. That would be a logical contradiction. So I agree there, but I don't see a reason to think that fundamentally many would be any worse or better. But I do remember you said there was like a 2-hour time limit. I want to be respectful of your time.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, I do need to get going pretty soon, within a few minutes. So if you want to wrap it up now, that's fine with me. Up to you.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out about your work?
Well, I'm a nobody. I was kind of surprised that you were asked to that you asked to put me on, but it was actually, I think it was Jeff, and I don't know why he thought to reach out to me. So it was actually to the SSPX, which is I guess it's because we're known for being Thomistic in our thinking, and you like to speak with Thomists. I don't have any published work. I have a few interviews on the SSPX podcast channel. So if you search for my name, that might come up. But I'm nobody. I'm just trying to do my job. That's all.
Me too, ironically.
Okay.
But
good.
Thanks again. Really appreciate you coming on,
Tom.
and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You as well. All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.